Okay, Bismillah. So the task, there are two main tasks of fiqh tahawulat. If you look at the 4 arkan, right, each of it has their own function. Every subject has their faedah function, right? So we say that this faedah or function is important for us to know, so that you get to it's a kind of like, why do I study this, right? Why do I need to know this subject, right? So what is the benefit, what is the outcome, what is the result, right? So in the book Concise Article, it says, let's read it first. The 4th pillar of the religion is comprised of 2 main tasks. The first task is the renewal of the language of fiqh of da'wah, fiqh of calling to Allah, taking into consideration the fiqh of da'wah precedes the fiqh of usul, right? This referring to fiqh of usul, referring to the Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So these are Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So what it is trying to say here is that fiqh of da'wah, it comes before all the arkan of Islam. You can say that, for instance, referring to those like the ahkam lah, basically the ahkam. Okay, the ahkam in general, right? If you talk about prayer, if you talk about fasting, if you talk about zakat, hajj, all these things, they come only later on in the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's da'wah, right? For example, the salat, when was it legislated, right? When was it legislated? It was later on, right? When was zakat legislated? When was fasting legislated, right? Most of which are legislated after the hijrah, right? So that is why he says here that the fiqh of da'wah, which is the part about calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It was the beginning of everything. It is the beginning and foundation of all the rest. You call to Allah first, then you teach people what they need to know once they answer the call, right? And then it has existed since the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was tasked with the divine message. Furthermore, the fiqh of da'wah is one that renews, right? In its delivery and conveyance, the methodology of the imams, which is based on hikmah, goodly admonition, and laying down a foundation of integrity, transmission predicated upon safeguarding tongues from abuse and protecting hands from shedding blood, except in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated and made obligatory. All of this is subsumed under the principle of meaning of the Quranic verse, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'izati al hasanah wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. So this is the verse, invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation, and reason them with in the way that is best. So this is the foundation of the da'wah lah. So the point he's trying to make here is, in simple terms, right? Fiqh of da'wah is something that it is not fixed, in the sense that it changes, right? There are elements of it which you change over the time, right? The da'wah that Rasulullah SAW began when he was in Makkah, what was the approach? Like, the approach was different. How was his approach in Makkah? How was his approach at the beginning of the message? How did it change, and so on, throughout the time, the different marhala, right? It renews, right? It renews, meaning it is the tajdid. There is a change, there is a renewal, there is a of approach, right, in the delivery and conveyance of the risalah. So unlike the fiqh of usul, right, the principles of Islam, Iman, Ihsan, right, they don't really change, right? They don't really change. They are generally fixed lah. Later on we'll see in the next chapters the thawabit lah. So they don't really change. The da'wah, the approach changes, right? The approach depends on the situation and the audience, the environment, the social context. So the methodology Based on what? Based on there's a methodology. So it does not change randomly or without any aim and objective. It has a methodology, right? What is the methodology? It follows the guidance of the imams. For us lah, basically. For us, when you do it, you follow a particular methodology. And what these imams, these scholars, their methodology is based on the Quranic, right, injunction to call with wisdom, right? Wisdom, mau'izah hasanah. Mau'izah hasanah and what do you call it? Jidal with in a way that is manner that is the best manner lah. So in summary, this is the first function of fiqh tahawulat. So the second is to protect the sciences of thawabit, which we mentioned earlier. What is the thawabit again? Right, the thawabit refers to the foundations lah. Islam, the ahkam, iman, the aqaid, all the points of cradle points, right? Protection, and then the ihsan as well. Protection here means safeguarding the nobility of, right, and the asanid from being instruments of trials and changes to lead people astray in sciences dealing with market. So, for example, we'll see. Let me show you my slide. Okay, let's talk a bit more on these two functions. So, as mentioned, right, it is important for us to establish the foundation of fiqh tahawulat and the function, right? The function, so that we can appreciate what is its proper place vis-a-vis the other usul like Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So what is fiqh tahawulat? Its place and its function and its role, right? So what makes it important, right? Distinguish between the differences, right, between Islam, Iman, Ihsan and fiqh tahawulat itself, the mutaghayyirat. Achieve, when you know this, right, when you know each of their roles and functions and objectives, right, you know how they complement each other, how they support each other, how they integrate, right, how they make the deen something that is comprehensive, universal and relevant, right, across the ages, across the different time. So da'wah is the first, the tajdid lughah fiqh da'wah. That is the first function of fiqh tahawulat. So what is da'wah? Da'wah is something that is very essential, right? If you look at the very beginning, as I mentioned earlier, the very beginning of the deen is through da'wah. Without da'wah, like you won't have anyone entering the deen. And the other thawabit, like who's going to learn them? So when the da'wah is there, people enter into the deen, then the usul comes in, you teach them each of the arkan of Islam, arkan of Iman, and so on and so forth. So da'wah, at every time there is a need for it, right? To call people to Islam, to call people to God. Is the activity of you employing your resources, intellectual resources, all your resources to find ways to bring people to Allah, right? So ultimately it is for their well-being. It is for their well-being at the individual level, and of course it will have an impact at the societal level, right? So this is an obligation lah, right? Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nasi ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah, right? You are the best of ummah, right? Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar. So that is your obligation, to do da'wah. As long as you are doing da'wah, you are the best of the ummah lah. Kuntum khayra ummah. So da'wah is understanding. You need to understand. It's not just the job of the scholars lah. Of course, it's the call that involves the person who does it has to have a deep understanding of the haqa'iq of the Sharia, the truths, the function, the Sharia, the reality of it, the goals, objectives, principles, and so on and so forth. So at the same time, right, how has it, what is its connection with tahawulat is the scholars, for instance, right, when they do da'wah, right, they must understand the mutaghayyirat, the ever-changing reality, right, the waqi', the ground, basically, what's happening, developments, problem, challenges, and then this is through religious texts. That means the nusus lah, basically the nusus of tahawulat also gives you guidance on this, right? For when we say lugha or fiqh of da'wah, right, we lugha is not literally the language in the sense of Arabic, English, Malay, but it is more of the sense of like how do you engage, right, your audience, right? Are they people in the mosque? Are they people um, students of knowledge, academics, intellectuals? Who are they? Like what kind of language, what kind of approach? That is the sense that is being used here. So when we talk about that, so different sections of society, and that is something that fiqh of da'wah has always addressed lah. Like if you buka kitab fiqh of da'wah, right, they will probably discuss about this. They talk about, okay, how do you engage different sections of society, right? And this is nothing new, right? Scholars of the past, maybe Imam al-Haddad has also addressed, right? If you look at his book, I think if I'm not wrong, Ad-Da'wah Tammah, right? And also many other ulama lah have addressed this thing. But when it comes to fiqh tahawulat, okay, and then this is the important point, you need to know the kind of approach for different marhala, different eras, right? You have so we learn all the marahil, we learn all the types of stages that we have gone through since the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's being sent, and then the time of the Khulafa, the time of the Mulkul Adud, and then all the way till today we are in al-Ghuthaiyyah, and each of the Ghuthaiyyah is separated. The Ghuthaiyyah is broken down into different stages, Ahlas and Duhaima and the Fitna Arabi'ah, all these things, these different eras. So what is the era that we are living in? What kind of approach should we use? What kind of language? So what is what is prevalent in society today, right? That needs to be addressed. So those doing da'wah must be aware and have knowledge. They cannot be out of touch with the society. So they must know what is happening, right? What kind of fitnah is happening, is emerging, the different, the dangers, right? And how to speak to people, right? Accordingly lah, right? So when you have new sciences, like when you talk about modern sciences, right? So they must know, they must have some knowledge. They don't have to be experts, right? For example, you talk about theory of evolution. You don't have to be an expert lah. You don't have to be like someone have a degree in or PhD in biology, but at least you know, right, what is going on in this discourse, right? What are they discussing, right? With respect to Islam, and then developments in modern sciences, studies done on between Islam and science, right? Maybe it's not just the natural sciences lah. Of course, when you talk about sciences, modern sciences, it encompasses all other kinds of sciences, right? Social sciences and so on. So at the same time, they need to know basically the lifestyle of the audience, what the challenges they are facing. So this, when you understand this, right, when you have awareness and knowledge of these things, right, you will be able to modify, renew your approach, right, and be more effective, right, be more effective, right, and importantly, to save what can be saved, right. Al-inqaz ma yumkin inqazu. To save, this is what Habib Abu Bakar always repeat. You need to be, you don't have to be able to save everyone, just save whatever you can save lah, from the all the challenges of the fitnah that's happening around us. So then we talk about the preservation of the thawabit. Islam Iman Ihsan. So when you learn about the different marhala, and at the same time you learn about the different azamah, that is this term which refers to crisis, problems, challenges, right? That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned at the end of times, like the Ghutha'iyah period, but particularly, right, we have wahan. Wahan is, what is wahan? Fear of death and love for the world. And then we have istitba'. You will follow the ways of those before you. Shibran bi shibrin, zira'an bi zira'in. If they enter the hole of the lizard, you will also follow, right? What do you call it? The Christians and the Jews, which refers to this new globalized monoculture or Western liberal secular ideologies, right? So what is the corruption that has entered into the ummah, right? All the crises, right? Al-qabd, the disappearance of knowledge, the removal of knowledge, taking away of knowledge, like the loss of knowledge, and naqad, right? Naqad la tunqadanna ural Islam. The Prophet said the bonds of Islam will be unraveled, right? One by one. So what can we see that has happened, right? What, for example, when you look at prayer, right? Prayer, what has happened to our prayers? What are the kinds of problems that have entered into this dimension or rukun of rukun of Islam? Especially when you look at when they discuss this, Habib Abu Bakar, they would always mention the kind of conflict between people who pray, right? At the end of times, people will pray, but their hearts will not be united, right? And then there are people who pray, but they have no amanah. Rubba musallin la amanatalah, right? So this is the kind of corruption that has entered into this thawabit. How can we mitigate? How can we minimize this? Firstly, in ourselves, right, and then others. Damage control. How do we guard ourselves? That people fight over intricacies of prayer, right? The details of salat, the furu' matters. People fight over what? Imams. They want to follow this imam, they don't want to follow that imam, they don't want to pray at this mosque, they want to, right? All this kind of tahrish bain al-musallin. The Prophet ﷺ said, right, shaitan has disappeared, right, from an yu'bad fi jazirat al-Arab. Shaitan has disappeared from being worshipped in the Arabian Peninsula. But in tahrish bain al-musallin, he has not disappeared from causing tahrish, from causing people to fight amongst each other. Not just people, but people who pray, right? Practicing Muslims, right? So that is his what do you call it? His engagement now lah. His occupation now. That's what he's engaged in. Right? He knows we will not worship him, right? Or his idols that he made, right? So how, right? How do we mitigate this? How do we guard ourselves? And what is our role? Once we know fiqh tahawulat, once we know all this, how can we function, right, to mitigate this, to preserve the thawabit, right? All of them. So you need, this is something new. So each of us, need to reflect on the salat, right? Fasting, zakat, hajj, umrah, all these things lah. And then the aqidah, the conflict between the polemics between different schools of aqidah, right? What is our role, right? How do we mitigate, how do we guard ourselves from all this? How at the end of the day, right, hifzul lisan min zam wa hifzul yad min dam. Guarding our hands from, our tongues from censure, from cursing and so on and so forth, and guarding our hands from shedding blood, right? So this is the hifzul thawabit, right? So he says that the second task is to protect the sciences of the thawabit from the nobility, adalah and asanid. So the adalah and asanid functions as a means for us to safeguard, right? If you hold on to this, right? If you hold on to the adalah and the sanad, right, of knowledge, it means it will guard you from going astray. It will guard you from falling into false conclusion, which many has fallen into. We have a particular movement that emerged in the last 200 years who does not follow any sanad of knowledge, right? And they come to conclusion that Muslims all over the world have fallen into kufr and shirk, and then it is their obligation, right? They even say that Muslims have fallen into a second jahiliyah, and it is their, obligation to call back people to Islam. And this movement, right, I'm sure you are well aware of that, they address fellow Muslims the way the Prophet ﷺ addressed the disbelievers, right? For instance, they send Rasulullah, if you remember, he would send letters of da'wah, right? Letters of da'wah to the emperors. Salamun ala man ittaba'al huda, right? Peace upon those who follow guidance. Because Rasulullah ﷺ was addressing disbelievers. He didn't say Assalamu alaikum. So Rasulullah did that to the disbelievers in his letter. But these people, right, they excommunicated, they takfir the Ottomans, for example. And they sent to the Ottoman Pasha, oh, salam, they didn't say Assalamu alaikum. They say Salamun ala man ittaba'al huda. If you follow us, embrace Islam, we will send someone from our people to go there and teach you the proper Islam. So that was the extent, right, of the takfir, right? So this is the textbook definition of fitnah, the very perfect example, right? So next is lesson 4, constants and variable, or you can say the mutables, the immutables and the mutables. So what exactly does this refer to, right? So it is recognized from the hadith of Jibril, illustrating the unity of subject matter from its context, that the fourth pillar of the religion is the science devoted to the science of the hour, and the science related to the pillar of the religion is divided into 2 categories. Thawabit, these are basic requirements for knowledge of Sharia, Islam, Aqidah, and Maratib as-Suluk, al-Ihsan. Okay, so yes, this we have mentioned this many times. Maratib as-Suluk, levels of the wayfaring or traveling to Allah SWT. Variables, these are the basic requirements for knowledge of science of the hour. Its numerous categories, also known as Fiqh al-Awwula and Fiqh al-Mutaghayyirat. So what exactly is constant? Islam is constant, the Shahada is constant, Salat is a constant, right? Zakat is a constant, it does not change. Its general principles, its general, obligatoriness, right? It does not change, right? And then how many times you pray, 5 times a day, all these generally do not change. But of course, in particular situations, contexts, they may change. But in general, they don't change. They are fixed, right? So likewise, Iman, even more so, right? Belief in Allah does not change ever. Believe in the prophets and so on and so forth. So these are why it is called constant. Maratib as-Suluk. You have the maqamat, right? You begin with tawbah. Everyone has to start with tawbah in their journey to Allah. And then you ascend from tawbah to all various maqamat until you reach the highest level, maybe the rida of, to be content with God, to have love of Allah, to achieve the fana and baqa and so on and so forth. All this, they don't change. It is fixed from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam until today. They don't change, right? But what they are affected by changes. They are affected by external factors, external attacks, right? People attack this science, claiming it is not from Islam, claiming that is derived from Hinduism or whatever, and so on and so forth. So, what is the imam, the function of the ulama, right? They safeguard it. When this kind of attacks happen, right? They safeguard it. They stand up and defend these matters, right? With their proofs, arguments. So then we have mutaghayyirat. Mutaghayyirat, what is actually we are talking about? What are the things that changes? Fiqh tahawulat have their principles. There are the Prophet said things about that will happen in the future, right? Nusus istibaqiyah. Right? So these nusus, do they change? The nusus themselves don't change, but they are based on things that change, right? They are about things that change. So events, right? Occurrences, all these things around us, they are changing. These changing things, phenomena. So basically, it's the understanding of this phenomena based on the nusus, right? So that is what is meant by the variability. It is the changes that around us, the phenomena that changes. But the principles of tahawulat, the principles of being safeguarding yourself from fitna, all these things are fixed, right? Okay, so this is something that we have to clarify. And next one is lesson 5. We have the pillars of knowledge concerning the science of the hour, right? The knowledge of the science of the hour is divided into 2 pillars. Okay, we have mentioned this again and again, right? The first is the antalidal amatu rabbataha. The maiden, the woman, gives birth to her mistress or master, which indicates a corruption of knowledge and aqidah. Right? Second pillar is when the barefooted, naked, impoverished shepherds are seen vying with each other in the construction of tall buildings. So the first pillar is preemptive text, nusus istibaqi, signaling change and instability in matters of knowledge and belief. Second pillar is also a preemptive text, is also nusus istibaqi, signaling change and corruption in matters of leadership and economics. So I think we have talked about this a lot, right? Especially the corruption in knowledge and beliefs. What has happened, right, in the last 200 or so years, right? And also the field of leadership and economics. What has happened in the last 200 years, basically the advent of colonialism and its impact on the Muslim world in all this from knowledge and beliefs, right, and leadership and economics. If you look at countries like the worst, I was reading this book. You might want to buy and read. It's called Fate of Abraham. Fate of Abraham. It's a newly published book. Basically, the author he talks about colonialism, the relationship between Western world and Muslims, especially the British, the Americans, and the French. So he focused on these 3 major powers in the last 200 years. Their relationship with Muslims and Muslim countries. Basically, for example, I would say the worst relationship between these British, French, and Muslims and Americans. It seems that the French were the worst in their treatment of their subjects, Muslim subjects in Algeria, right, especially where they enforced, right, the kind of education so-called to justify it. They would say that, oh, we need these Muslims are backward, we want to give them progress, so they make French as they put French instead of Arabic as a language in school. This allow women from wearing hijab in government office, and all kinds of effort to secularize the Algerians, and not to mention the atrocities that how they treated the Algerians, you know. And if you remember, we read about the Matla' an-Nabawi, the prophetic preamble. In the starting beginning of the book, right, we have uh, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said this ummah will face oppression, right? Will face oppressive rule, or sayusibu ummati fi akhir zaman bala syadid min sultanihim la yanju minhu illa. So that part about the bala, right? The atrocities that people will face, that this ummah will face from those in power, right? So when you look at you read this book, when you look at how the Muslims were being treated, right, you will really see like this manifesting, right, this hadith in front of your eyes, right? How they were um, treated despite their support for these powers during the World War, right? They were supporting, the Muslims were fighting for the French, the Muslims were fighting for the British, the Muslims were fighting for, yeah, these two powers, basically in the World War. And in the end, they got nothing from these people, right? They were treated, they did not get any reward or any kind of incentive that they were promised, right? They were sidelined, they were treated second-class citizen, or even worse, they were not even recognized as citizens when they immigrate, right, to these countries. Right? So yeah, it's an eye-opener, and how you understand how, until today these countries like Algeria, Tunisia, right, how they are still struggling, right? Why there was an Arab Revolution, right? How post-colonialism, right? How these powers have, even though they have left these countries, they still have, right, their deep, what do you call it, deep state. Right? They still rule from within. They still have influence. They still have interests in these countries, right? Despite the fact that they have left, so-called given these countries their independence, right? And so, yeah, it is really a good read. I really encourage you all to read if you have the time. Wallahu alam. Apologies to those who just entered. I think we just came to the end of the lesson, right? So we were talking about the two pillars of fiqh tahawulat. The first being the corruption of knowledge and beliefs. Second being the corruption of leadership and economics. Right. So yeah, corruption of leadership and economics, also a lot of it is influenced by the kind of leadership that these powers, that these colonial powers, they live, right? When they left the countries that they were colonizing, the kind of leadership that they left behind, who they chose as the leaders. And some of these countries tried to find their own leaders, but at the end of the day, the deep state, they managed to overthrow the leaders chosen by the people and get their own leaders back, who would promote their interests, right? Because, for example, you see France, Algeria, they are still located very close to each other, right? And they still have a lot of interest in that country, even though they have left these countries. Wallahu alam. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Right, so inshallah next lesson we'll go through the next chapter, lesson 6 onwards. Any questions before we end? Okay, so no questions. See you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.